Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us in person or online. My name is Emily Poznansky. I'm Director of Central European University Press. I joined about 2 years ago to grow and expand the work of the press. Today, we have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Natalie Zemon Davis, a much loved member of the CEU community, to present her recently published title with CEU Press, Listening to the Languages of the People. Natalie's book is the 500th title published at CEU Press, and we couldn't think of a better representative title and author than Natalie to represent the solid collection of books that we've published so far. Natalie needs no introduction, but for the sake of formality, I will say a few words. So Natalie is Henry Charles Beer Professor of History Emeritus at Princeton University and is currently associated with the Department of History at the University of Toronto. In 2010, she received the Holberg International Prize from the Government of Norway for her work in the humanities. In 2012, she was named Companion of the Order of Canada, and the following year, she was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Obama. Natalie will open the event with a few words, and then we'll follow by Konstantin Iordache and Gabor Klanitsa. Konstantin Iordache is Professor of History at the CEU, co-director of PAST and President of COMFES. He's member of the CEU Press Editorial Advisory Board and now Editor-in-Chief of the upcoming CEU Review of Books. Gabor Klanitsa is Professor of Medieval Studies at the CEU, Corresponding Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has organized since 2006 the Natalie Zemon Davis Lecture Series, also published at CEU Press. So after Konstantin and Gabor share their responses to Natalie, Natalie will take center stage again, and afterwards we'll follow with a Q&A. So we'll be keeping an eye online for questions as well, so please do post those. And for those people in the room, we do have a reception afterwards. So we would welcome you to toast Natalie's fantastic book and the next 500 books at CEU Press. Okay, over to Natalie, first of all. Natalie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Thank you so much, Emily. I want to say how thrilled I am to have my book be published as the 500th book of the Central European University Press, and to say, as I have in the past, how much I have enjoyed my visits to the university, which were annual in the past and now represented by Zoom online, how much I've enjoyed meeting with faculty, with students, hearing the Natalie Zemon Davis lectures in the past and the lectures of other colleagues. So it's a pleasure to be with you today. Well, the hero of my new book is a Romanian Jew named Lazar Shenyanu, who lived in the late 19th and early 20th century. He's another one of those people between worlds, like Leo Africanus, whose lives and works I've been trying to track in recent years. Leo lived between Islam and Christianity, between North Africa and Italy. Lazar lived between the world of Jews and Jewish scholarship on Jewish themes and the world of Romania and its folk culture. His movement ultimately extended into France. Born in 1859 in Wallachia, Shenyanu was educated in his mother tongue of Yiddish and in Romanian and in French, the latter deepened by years of study in France. Out of his early links to Haskalah, that is the Jewish Enlightenment in Romania, emerged his pioneering 1889 book on Yiddish. Denigrated by early philologists as a mere jargon, a kind of slang, Yiddish was shown by Shenyanu to be a genuine language, long in use in a rich body of literature. At the same time, he opened up new approaches to Romanian, the youngest of the Romance languages, and still in need of good dictionaries, which he tried to supply. More important was his book, Basmela Romana, of 1895, he studied and thematic classification of hundreds of Romanian folk tales. Indeed, the classification of folk tales was still in its infancy for any language at that date, and he was a real pioneer. And at that time, he was beginning to work on French folk tales as well. Whatever the language or literature, certain themes emerged early in Semyonov's scholarship and persisted throughout his lifetime. These concerned the evaluation of languages according to schema developed by German linguists in the course of the 19th century. A prominent theory saw the Indo-European languages and the Semitic language as both emerging from a pre-Sanskrit language, but placed the Indo-European languages and the Semitic language, but placed the Indo-European languages well above the Semitic ones in richness and quality. For Semyonov, following the philosophy of his great Paris teacher, Michel Brial, there was no strict hierarchy of language. They all had their qualities, and they all had a range appropriate for thought and communication. A second theory, current in Romania, judged languages by their alleged purity. Thus, the Romance languages were at their best where they rested most fully on Latin origins. Well, some Romanian philologists took this view so seriously that they tried to purge words with a Slavic or Turkish origin from Romanian, thereby leaving that language much impoverished and supplied with absurd substitutes. Semyonov, like his mentor, the celebrated Austrian linguist Hugo Schuchart, argued for mixture, the mixed social and geographical origin of Romanian words, and the continuing addition of words and sounds to encounters with peoples from other communities. This mixture was important, along with the so-called natural or unconscious processes of language change. These views were held together for Semyonov by his deeply held commitment to the belief that language creation owed much to the people themselves, by which he meant the common folk, not just the learned with their Latin and Greek sources. Indeed, for him, the common people had their own treasury of words, drawn from their everyday experience. These were the sources that philologists rightly should be examined. Well, Semyonov's Bezmala won the scholarly prizes in France and Romania both. They did others of his publications. But despite this recognition, he was unable to get a regular teaching post in a Romanian university. He was barely making a living for himself, his wife, and his new baby daughters, with jobs teaching high school or as a substitute teacher at the University of Bucharest. Nor was he able to win naturalization for himself as a Romanian citizen, a status for which Jews had to apply, even when, like Semyonov, they had been born in Romania itself. The ferocious anti-Semitism of a powerful senator and his cohorts was at work here. In the wake of humiliating attacks on him in the Romanian Senate, and in the wake of his fruitless and foolish conversion to Christianity, Semyonov finally gave up on his motherland, as he called it, and by 1900 had moved with his family to Paris. The last decades of his life revealed another rich harvest of work, now devoted primarily to French folklore, French language and literature, and written under his new name as Lazare Semyonov. His book on Yiddish he published in French translation, but it received little response in a country still smarting from the debates over the Dreyfus affair, the peace. He turned now to what he called the popular languages of France: slang, argot, street languages, the language of soldiers in the trenches, the everyday language of Parisians. Once again, his books won prizes, especially for opening up new fields for French studies. They caught the attention of Abel Lefranc, a very important scholar and director of an exciting project to edit all the writings of François Rabelais. The creative work of Stenion's last years was devoted to that great figure, François Rabelais, and the multiple popular sources of his extraordinary vocabulary. France had become Stenion's new motherland, as he now talked of art, Rabelais, note vocabulary. Stenyon died in France in 1934, still seeking popular origins for the French tongue, still listening to the languages of the people. And I hope you readers of my book will enjoy the story of this man's career and the fate of languages that he loved in a Europe fraught with nationalist exclusion.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm really honored to be part of this discussion with our distinguished author and also to interact with you. I would say that at first sight, the topic of this book might come as a surprise for you. For those who know Natalie Zemon Davis's work, we know that Professor Davis's work focuses mostly on France and Western Europe more generally, but also on other places of the world, such as North America, North and West Africa, and the Caribbean, while this book concentrates rather atypically, I would say, on a Central European story. Moreover, most of Professor Davis's research focuses on the earlier periods, namely the 16th, 17th, or 18th centuries, while this book explores the second part of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Last but not least, we might say that the book concentrates on a male protagonist, which is of course not unprecedented. See the return of Martin Guerre, but surely there's an interesting choice of character here, while compared, for example, with Professor Davis's 1995 book, Women on the Margins, which looks at the autobiographical accounts of a couple of 17th century women protagonists, including a Jewish merchant. At a closer scrutiny, however, the main themes of this book appear to be fully in line with Professor Davis's research interest. She has always been interested in exceptional characters who transcend in various ways cultural, political, or language barriers, and who act willingly or unwillingly as intermediaries or agents of change among cultures, religious, or academic traditions. The renowned Jewish comparative philologist, linguist, and folklorist Lazar Shoinanu offers such an outstanding example of an intermediary among and between cultures. Born in 1859 in Ploiești, Muntenia, in the Romanian Principalities, from Jewish parents, also born in the country. Shoinanu studied at the University of Bucharest, at the École des Hautes Études and École de Langue Orientale in Paris, France, and gained his PhD at the University of Leipzig in Germany. We could see the choice of France, but also Germany. It was a trend among Romanian intellectuals to combine the two traditions at the time, although of course the French tradition prevailed. Upon his return to Romania, he temporarily taught at the University of Bucharest and later at the École Normale Supérieure, also in Bucharest. Shoinanu conducted a prodigious scientific activity in Romania, making invaluable contribution to Yiddish and Romanian philology, and which gained him numerous prizes, including the prestigious Ion Heliade Rădulescu Prize of the Romanian Academy. However, his academic career was blocked in Romania, and to understand that, we should look at the status of the Jewish community in Romania at the time. The Romanian, this book really looks at Shoinanu's citizenship status and his attempt to naturalize to Romanian citizenship, an attempt that lasted about 12 years. It was really an epic failure, but which is probably unique in the history of citizenship. And I will want to focus a little bit on this because I've also written a monograph on Romanian citizenship, but also it really explains, the marginality of Șeineanu, but also his unique insight into Jewish Romanian and French culture. So Romanian citizenship was made up through the union of Moldova and Wallachia, and then after 1918, Transylvania and the Banat. In mid-19th century, you have the union of these two principalities, Moldova and Wallachia. They were united under the aegis of the Concert of Europe. In 1858, they were granted a European constitution, a liberal constitution, and then there was a referendum for union, which was an experiment in the principle of nationality. And so I take this as an experiment in liberal nation and state building. The Jewish question was very important at the time. There were Jews living in the Romanian principalities, and their status became a political problem. And at the beginning, there was a liberal trend toward emancipation. You see this in 1848. There were many Jews who actually took part in elections. You see then after the union of the principalities in 1859, there were calls for a conditional emancipation of the Jews. That is, there was an expectation that they take up the Romanian language, enroll in schools, and then they will get Romanian citizenship. However, gradually, a different approach prevailed, an illiberal approach to the Jewish question, which came mostly from northern Moldavia. Why? Because there was a great influx of Jews coming from Galicia, and so there was a trend against Jewish emancipation. And so by 1878, 1866, Romanian Jews were denaturalized en masse. Therefore, they lost citizenship. Arguably, they had it before. They had a local form of citizenship before the nation state. They lost that, and they were required to naturalize individually. So the law of the Romanian Parliament was required individually for naturalization. Now, Șeineanu is part of a new generation of Jews who were born in Romania, were attending Romanian school, and they were fluent in the Romanian language. And he and his generation were very active in 1880s, 1890s. They adopted a combination of loyalty to the Romanian state, but also voice, speaking on behalf of the Jewish community and showing that Jews live on Romanian territory, fulfill all citizenship duties, but have no citizenship rights. They were serving also in the army, but they were not entitled to Romanian citizenship. And here comes the saga of his citizenship application. Șeineanu went abroad for studying, but he applied for Romanian citizenship in 1887. His application was put on hold for about 2 years because he was not in the country. And when he came, the application was rejected by the chamber of the lower house of the parliament, but also by the Senate. He reapplied for citizenship in 1993. His application was accepted in the lower house, but when was rejected by the Senate. Then he applied again for citizenship in 1997, and his request was accepted by the lower house, but also then by the Senate. And so in 1989, he thought that he obtained Romanian citizenship for about 24 hours. But then his naturalization was contested on procedural grounds. It was said that, yes, he obtained the acceptance of both houses, but not in the same parliamentary year. Therefore, he would have to apply yet again for citizenship. So you really see the drama of the Jewish community in Romania, who were subjects, but not citizens. And it's very interesting how in his memoirs, Șeineanu really reflects on the condition of the Jews, and this prompts him then to migrate to France. And the book is very good in actually tracing the Romanian career of Șeineanu, but also his career in France. And it is extraordinary that Șeineanu was able to write on Yiddish philology, on Romanian language, but also then on on French language and on Rabelais, and to make academic career in France as well. And yeah, Natalie's second part of the book looks at Cheinano's activity in France, where he was naturalized, and then he published broadly, but without being able to gain a teaching position. His relative cultural marginality in France as well points out to a certain extent to the rising tide of anti-Semitism in Europe at the turn of the century, in East and West alike. It also points out to the challenges of assimilation and integration experienced by cosmopolitan cultural figures such as Cheinano. So this rich and eventful biography of Lazar Cheinano offers a fascinating yet relatively unknown example of a mediator crossing borders and transcending cultures. In Professor Davis's own words, Cheinano's biography is, I quote, a fascinating addition to my study of figures who cross cultures and geographical boundaries, and of the entanglements, difficulties, and creativities which ensue from them. End of citation. This is because Cheinano, through his biography and writing, had served, in Professor Davis's words, served three people through the study of languages, that is Romanian, Yiddish, and French. And by the way, because he had three identities, he also had three names. So he was born as Lazar Shine. Then he used his name, Lazar Cheinano in Romania, the Romanian version. And then you see on the cover Lazar Cheinan, so the French version of his name. The book focuses on Cheinano's life and career in Romania and in France. I have to say that when I've read it, it was a bit unsettling at the beginning because there was a lack of contextualization, as the narrative provided the minimal upfront information on, say, the political life in Romania or the legal situation of Jews in Southeastern Europe in general, and Romania in particular. However, the reader learns a lot about these issues by following the trajectory of Cheinano's life. Although the style of writing is first and foremost biographical, we learn incredibly much about the state of linguistic and socio-cultural studies in Europe, with a focus on France, Great Britain, Romania, and the Balkans. Professor Davis brings to life a great number of cultural figures with whom Cheinano interacted. She discussed it at length, Cheinano's research agenda, scholarly findings, and their impact, all against the background of major debates in the field of European linguistics. The result is not only a thick description of the evolution of linguistics as a science, but also a rich depiction of social and scientific life of Romania, France, Great Britain in the second half of the 19th century to the inter period. And I was particularly amazed to see how well Professor Davis engages with the Romanian scholarship on the issue, in addition to French and Jewish sources. So her bibliography covers well the main classic work on Cheinano and Romanian politics, including plenty of citations from Romanian sources. In conclusion, this is a very rich book that should be of interest to all those focusing on cultural history, biographies, linguistic studies, Jewish studies, the history of Southeastern Europe, citizenship studies, and also international relations during the modern period. Since Cheinano was a Jew from Romania, or from Central Europe, this is also a topic of Central European history. And so it's not by chance that Professor Davis has developed her project at CEU, and there were several workshops on this project. I'm really happy to see the book now in print, and I think it is also explained why the book is published with CEU Press. So in the end, I would say that this is a very innovative book that is difficult to classify. I would say that first and foremost is a scholarly biography of Cheinano, but one presented in parallel to his Ego Histoire autobiographical accounts. And Cheinano published such autobiographical accounts in Romanian as well as in French. Yet the book is also an innovative exercise in cultural history, an intellectual biography in context, documenting Romanian, Jewish, French, and other European-wide cultural entanglements. I hope that, in her intervention, Professor Davis might want to further tell us more about the choice of the topic, about the challenges she faced in writing the book, and about how she sees the relationship among the multiple complementary aspects of this book. And so in a way, you might say this is a tragic story or a bitter story. And that Sheinanu remained a marginal figure who never got the appreciation or acknowledgement that he deserved. But I think that this marginality was also his major assets. This is an extraordinary scholar who was really at home in Romanian culture, in Jewish culture, in Yiddish language, and also in the French culture, and who transcends so easily cultural borders. And so he's, for this reason, also a pioneer in comparative philology.
Hello, Natalie. I'm very glad that this book is published here and in your presence we can present it. There will be some repetitions in my presentation because it's about the same book, and but it may be from a little bit of a different angle. You will see. I have it written down. We haven't discussed it before, so that's second vision of the same book. The book describes the intellectual and social biography of a fascinating and tragic figure, as we heard, the Romanian Jewish linguist and historian Lazar Shaineanu Seneon. In exciting research, Natalie uncovers the human, emotional, and scholarly intellectual trajectory of this Jewish Romanian French academic, whose academic concerns, preferences, and insights are so close to the new kind of history of the last decades of the 20th century, of which Natalie Zemon Davis is a prominent representative. While doing this, the book is written with the already familiar merits of the author. She presents the unfolding of the complex mixture of academic, political, and private issues, defining the rise and the flops of the career of Shaineanu, which amounts to an instructive and saddening picture of the rise of anti-Semitism in late 19th century Romania. The book, as the introduction states, grew out of a curiosity. Natalie Zemon Davis, as a Cesiemist, 16th century scholar, has been using a basic book on the language of Rabelais, La Langue de Rabelais, by Lazar Seneon, a French scholar of Romanian Jewish origin, as she knew. In connection with her frequent visits to the CEU, she had the opportunity to consult on the original career of this scholar, with Constantin above all, and this sparked her interest. Lazar Schein, renamed Shaineanu, was a talented linguist and philologian in the last decades of the 19th century. He started his publishing career on the historical formation of the Romanian language with the innovative approach that acknowledged the variety of ethnic, linguistic, and folkloric influences which shaped it throughout the history, going against the emerging purist Roman or Daco-Roman explanations. At the same time, he was one of the first scholars to develop a scholarly interest in Yiddish speech, his mother tongue, a specific mixture of German with a number of local dialects among the various groups of Jewish diasporas in East Central Europe. His attention was directed to an appreciation of the languages of the people, hence the title of the book. He considered linguistic mixture, hybridity, a natural state of all languages, a result of ever-renewing creativity in opposition to the prevailing ideas of safeguarding or developing a canonized high version of languages, forming a hierarchical tree of evolution according to Darwinian principles. Shaineanu's linguistic studies and dictionaries were also paired with an ethnographic anthropological research on Romanian folktales. He prepared a prize-winning, path-breaking monograph on it. While engaging in these researches, he developed an ardent desire to be recognized as a naturalized Romanian citizen and to obtain a university chair in Romanian linguistics. This, however, was becoming very difficult with the rising anti-Semitic climate. The second part of the book describes his ongoing struggle for recognition, going as far as getting converted to Orthodox Christianity, his humiliating search for influential patrons who all abandoned to support his case at the crucial moments, and the repeated failure of being accepted because of the renewed violent attacks by anti-Semitic nationalist enemies. He ended up to be also rejected by Jewish colleagues who formerly much appreciated his work, such as Moses Gaster, because of his conversion, and also because he failed to align to the rising Zionist movement. Ultimately, Shaineanu was constrained to emigrate to France in 1901. He changed again his name to Lazare Sénéan and published a moving intellectual autobiography, which has just been mentioned by Constantin, both in Romanian and French, titled Une carrière philologique en Roumanie, les péripéties d'une naturalisation. So the difficulties of this naturalization. While he had good hopes to be patronized in France by his previous good contacts with Michel Bréal and Gaston Paris, he had to find that the intellectual political situation unexpectedly was somewhat similar to the one he left behind in Romania, the aftermath of the Dreyfus affair. In any case, his contacts and his talents did earn him some recognition there. He could use his up-to-date theoretical and methodological sensibility for giving new insights into contemporary linguistic debates and produce valuable work on medieval French fabliaux, on the argot and the Parisian slang, and on the language of François Rabelais. Ultimately, however, a real integration was not possible in France either. He was appreciated but remained an outsider, frequently ignored. As Roger Chartier aptly remarks in his blurb to the book, he was, I quote, a man who dedicated his intellectual life to encounters, loved 2 nations and 3 languages, and, however, remained everywhere a foreigner. This fascinating and at certain points heartbreaking biography of Lazare Sénéan fits perfectly well into the series of border-crossing historical figures who captured the attention of Natalie Zemon Davis throughout her long career as historian. First, there was Poncet, the impostor who tried to get accepted as Martin Guerre, occupying his marital bed and family possessions. He proved to be a better husband and a more industrious farmer than the original Martin, yet finally he got unveiled and lost everything, including his life. Lazare Shaineanu might make us think here of interesting analogies with his unsuccessful struggle for being naturalized as a Romanian citizen, despite all his outstanding expertise in the history of Romanian language and folklore. The 3 protagonists in her Women on the Margins can also give rise to some associations. Glickel was Judas Leib, also known as Glickel Hamel, the author of the first and only pre-modern autobiography by a woman in Yiddish, is already mentioned on the first page of the new book of Natalie Zemon Davis, since it is at her research on Glickel that she came across the name of Shaineanu as an expert on Yiddish, while she knew him to be a Rabelais researcher, a coincidence which triggered her interest in him. The second and third woman on the margin, Marie de l'Incarnation, the French Ursuline visionary nun who became the co-founder of a Christian school for Amerindian women in Quebec, and Maria Sibylla Merian, the German botanist and illustrator who became an expert on the plants and insects of the Dutch colony Suriname, were both remarkably enterprising persons who left behind their families, inheritance, also their countries, and engaged in a new sphere of activity in the New World with remarkable results. Shaineanu turned Sénéan after he left Romania because of losing his hopes, faced a similar challenge when he decided to translate his knowledge on the history of Romanian and Yiddish language mixtures to make relevant and appreciated observations on the history of French language and its dialects. Finally, there is the hero of Natalie Zemon Davis's monograph titled Trickster's Travels, a 16th century Muslim between worlds, Al-Hassan Muhammad al-Wazan, the Andalusian diplomat captured by Spanish pirates and ending up in the court of Pope Leo X, where he converted to Christianity, took up the name Johannes Leo Africanus de Medicis, Giovanni Leone, and authored there the path-breaking Cosmographia and Geographia de Africa. Shaineanu also went through this experience of utilitarian conversion for being better accepted, and probably easily disregarded the practice of Orthodox Christianity when it proved to be useless for him, just like Leo Africanus, who probably reconverted to Islam after he left Rome and returned to Africa. All these figures, crossing geographical, cultural, and religious boundaries, talking to us with their own words, preserved in diaries and correspondence, and described by Natalie Zemon Davis with a erudite empathy, keep on fascinating the historical imagination. And Lazar Shaineanu Senior now joins their rank. Yet another fascinating story to read. But there is also another dimension of Natalie Zemon Davis's craft as historian, about which she makes us aware at the end of her preface in this book. She says, it is not only the biography of Lazar Shaineanu, the Romanian Jew, but it is also a study of how ideas about language and folklore fare in a Europe infused with national sentiment and conflict over the status of Jews. The title, Listening to the Languages of the People, should resonate in our memory also as a methodological credo. Natalie Zemon Davis started as one of the pioneers of a history of popular culture, charivari, carnival, proverbial wisdom, later reformulated as historical anthropology. She was always attentively listening to popular storytellers, women as much or even more than men, amplifying their voice in her writings, and took delight in demonstrating their valuable inventiveness. At the same time, she explored with insatiable curiosity the internal patterns and conflicts of the different historical fields of knowledge and culture, be it tweaking the law and manufacturing pardon letters, or the logic of mystical visions, or naturalist research on botanic and insects, or cosmographical and geographical descriptions. This time it is the turn of the relation of linguistic studies and folklore, as evolving in late 19th century Europe. She portrays their instructive development, influenced by the rising nationalist currents in Romania and even in France, and by the Jewish diaspora, torn between the preservation of their own ethnic traditions, the assimilation to the dominant nations, or the emerging Zionism, a recreation of a new tradition. In the person of Lazar Shaineanu, she found a key figure who played a considerable role with remarkable insights in this saga of Romanian, Yiddish, and French historical linguistics. Shaineanu's learned observations fit very well to a present-day appreciation of linguistic hybridity, and Natalie Zemon Davis could show once again how these scholarly insights were filtered through the passions and disappointments of flesh and blood humans. Shaineanu's life story, his attempts to find friends, understanding patrons and colleagues, and his humiliations, his self-defense, his enduring fight with his enemies amounts to a history tout feu, tout sang, or fire or blood, as she once characterized her own approach in a French interview volume. Thank you, Natalie, for this wonderful book.
Okay, Natalie, so thank you, Gabor. Thank you, Konstantin. So we welcome Natalie back to respond to the two talks we just had.
Now, I want to thank Konstantin and Gabor from the bottom of my heart for their remarks, for their cogent and very helpful comments about the book and about its relationship to my work and to the wider context. I learned Konstantin spoke about the importance of the struggles in Romania for citizenship and the whole situation. I want to see how much I learned from his own writings already as background for the book, and how much I appreciate his important contextualization today. And I also want to say to Gabor that hearing you speak about my work, I learned some new things, like themes I hadn't seen that keep surfacing. I hope that that I've learned as I've approached these things. Sometimes I think we have our thumbprint of styles as a historian. We keep repeating. I think that there is that commonality in my concern about personality, identity, that quest. But I hope deepen as a result of the topics that I've taken up and the challenges. Konstantin specifically asked me to comment on the challenges found in writing this book, and I will comment on that. I did feel challenges. Some of them were a pleasure, and some were more difficult. First, I had to learn a lot about Romanian history and the Romanian language, and that was fun in many ways. It was very agreeable. I do have to say that the constant shifts in the spelling policy of Romania, whether they were going to have diacritical marks or not, were a little bit of an irritation. They seem to have changed with each Romanian regime. But at any rate, I felt that I enjoyed very much learning the language. The second thing that I guess I have to admit as a Jewish person, I did find the history of anti-Semitism in Romania in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Some of the popular riots, the government policy. Of course, as an historian, you read what you read, and that's that. You don't make judgments. You just read. You try to understand. As Mark Bloch told us, understand when you're studying, judge later. So I did try to understand. I kept finding it hard, though, when I would say to my late husband, still alive when I was working on it, I can't believe it. I can't believe this new anti-Semitic episode. So that was one thing that I had to accept and understand and place within a European context. The second thing I have to admit was that conversion, Semyonov's conversion to Christianity. If I had rewritten his life, I would have said, well, let's not do that. Let's not try that path. I had to cope with that. This is always a challenge for Jewish people to think about. And I coped with it in the book and for myself by contextualizing it, by finding other examples, going back to Heine's actual writing about conversion, other examples of conversion, some of which I drew upon and described in the book, so I could frame him. He wasn't enough. It wasn't alone. I would just stress, as commentators voted too, that it was embarrassing. It was fruitless. He had been promised if he converted that he would get a position in a French university where his naturalism would be smooth, and that did not happen. His younger brother, who converted at the same time, and who died in Bucharest in, I think, the late 1940s, a long time, wrote about that conversion and how he had really almost had been his idea, stimulated by a member of the government who had made him a promise that was never kept. The brother, I think, was embarrassed about it years later. But at any rate, I found it a challenge to write about, and finally a creative challenge. It led me to place something I wanted very much to do, to place his life, to place his trajectory along the spectrum of other late 19th, early 20th century Jewish intellectuals. And for this reason, not only his own friends from childhood, Moses Gaston, who became a very important Zionist and a rabbi in London after he left Romania, but someone like Max Nordau, initially an author of the book Regeneration, but then an important playwright, and another figure, very active in the early Zionist movement. And I wanted to see people like Gassner and Nordau and Shenyano as alternate paths in late 19th century Jewish life, something that scholars like the late Michael Maris have stressed in their writing about France in that period. It was hard to do in terms of being a challenge, but that was it was a challenge worth living up to. I guess the final challenge, and one I didn't find really a way to meet, maybe it will seem artificial, but anybody like me who works in women's history, you always look to see, is there a gender dimension here? Am I the interested? I didn't feel I could do anything on that. I mean, I talk about women, I talk about men, but I didn't have any analytical thrust in regard to that. And I couldn't see it. You can't make these things artificial. Maybe it's there. Some other younger scholar will come along and find all kinds of new things. So that, I guess those were the main challenges. Again, I want to thank both speakers so much of their appreciation of the book, their comments on the book, and to say how grateful I am to the press for publishing it. And I look forward to questions and answers, answering any questions if I can.
Thank you, Natalie. So I think at this point we'll open up the room here and the Zoom room for questions. And am I right that the participants on Zoom can just unmute and speak? And yeah, so the floor is open. Any questions from the audience?
So I would have something, I'm not sure whether it's a question or a comment, but I want to disagree very strongly with Natalie, because I think that gender is absolutely everywhere in this book.
Oh, good.
Because it's a story where you present him in relationship to his daughter, which I found really moving, and his wife, but you show that that isn't just about personal relationships. It comes out in the way he thinks, which is why he's interested in the language with which he grew up, which he learned from his mother tongue, and also in folklore and in women's stories. And you start out with the story of the women of the night. And I thought this was a wonderful way in which it's just implicit in the whole book that could not have been written in that way, except by someone like you with such a strong sense of how this is not just a question of emotional relations, it's about how you think. And I thought that was wonderful. And I thought that the other thing that comes out of the book, and which I think part of the discussion, which I couldn't quite hear either, was also about, is it's not just about an individual, it's about an audience. How does one find an audience for ideas? And for that, it's not just about publication, although as you show, that's also very much part of the story, but it's about how an audience can be created and safeguarded, and the tragedy of this man who never had an academic post. And even when he went to Paris, the structures weren't there for him to be fully part of that community. And I think the issue that it raises for all of us is, how do we safeguard intellectual traditions in societies which are hostile to them for certain periods? And I found that very timely and very moving.
Thank you so much for both of those comments, Linda. And especially for the comment about the gender being implicit. Yes, it was. Is it okay to leave it implicit? I couldn't find a way to make it explicit, give it an analytical edge. And maybe it's okay if it was implicit, since it seems to you saw that. I mean, there are women everywhere in the book, and the stories in the book, the storytellers. But I felt that, but anyway, I will live happily with implicitness, and I'll leave the thoughts about the important thoughts about the relationality of speaker and audience and the importance of the context. I'll leave that to further discussion to others.
I would be glad to make an intervention if there isn't anyone else waiting in the room, the real room. We are in a real room though together now. I'm masquerading here. Speaking of gender issues, using my husband's computer. I'm not John Gerard, fond though I am of him, but Margaret Mackay is my name, and I'm delighted to be in this company today to honor Natalie. I had the great privilege of being her student as an undergraduate at the University of Toronto in the 1960s. I'm sure many of you would envy that experience. And some of you probably have had the experience of learning with her, continuing to learn with her right through our lives in so many ways, through that community of scholarship and of friendship that is an intersecting one. I was delighted to, along with my colleague, Dr. Frances Dow from the University of Edinburgh, who's here today too, to welcome Natalie into the community of honorary graduates of the University of Edinburgh quite a number of years ago now. And it is splendid to hear more about the research and now the publication on this fascinating person, which she has brought to us, and also to be reminded of the importance of the voice of the people, the folklore, the oral traditions, the oral transmission, and so on, that were so much part of the life of the central person in this new publication. Here in Scotland, we are looking at present, as we have for a long time, at the Scots language, not the Celtic Gaelic language of Scotland, but the Scots language derived from a version of Northern Old English, but with many connections with the north of Europe and the languages there of Scandinavia and of Northern continental Europe. Its fight to be recognized as a language in its own right has been recognized by the European Union, but isn't always seen as such by others. But I'm not wanting to give a lecture here, just to say how these issues are very much part of our own lives at the moment. And only on Monday, I was at a very moving presentation at the University of Edinburgh by a leading translator from Taras Shevchenko University in Kyiv, with which the University of Edinburgh has engaged in a twinning operation to speak on her subject, which is the translation of Ukrainian literature into Russian. And we are in the midst of a situation now where language and identity and so on, as expressed through linguistic matters, are so important again. I just want to thank Natalie for everything, And if I could only hand to her these tulips, which are sitting beside me, not just do it visually, virtually, I mean, I know I'd be doing it on behalf of everyone who is here today. Thank you very, very much, and thank you for the pleasure of attending.
Oh, Margaret, thank you so much. It's thrilling to think of you as an early student with this splendid career, fabulous career that you have had and all you have done for the Scottish tongue and the Scottish folklore. So I accept the flowers visually and virtually with great pleasure and your presence.